I don't want her to be my wife.
On their wedding night, he whispered coldly in her ear, "I don't want you as a wife. I never did." Raella Raymond cried silently. Her heart was shattered. Cesare Conte, the Mafia boss, treated her like a ghost. She looked exactly like Elena, his dead wife. Months later, when enemies attacked, she grabbed a gun and revealed who she really was. He was shocked by the truth. Let me tell you something. If he looked at you and said your name, would you have the courage to answer? Chapter 1. Loveless Marriage.
This means nothing.
The Valentino dress weighed on my shoulders like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. The hand-embroidered pearls reflected the golden afternoon light, streaming through the stained glass windows of Santa Maria Church, and I walked down the long aisle trying to breathe calmly, while every gaze turned toward me. My father held my arm with excessive firmness, as if he feared I might flee at any moment. But the truth is, my feet moved on their own toward the altar where he was waiting for me. Cesare Conte, my future husband, stood there, motionless as a marble statue, his impeccable Armani suit molding his tall frame, and the rigid posture of someone who had never learned to relax. His face was a perfect mask of indifference, and when our eyes finally met, I saw no trace of emotion, no nervousness, no anticipation, nothing to indicate that this moment meant anything beyond a business deal being signed. My heart tightened in my chest, but I forced a smile on my lips and kept walking. I had spent weeks convincing myself this could work, that perhaps the arranged marriage between our families could turn into something real over time. But the way he looked at me now, with that distant coldness in his dark eyes, made all my foolish hopes tremble at their foundation. When I finally reached the altar, my father placed my hand in Cesare's, with a formality that resembled the transfer of property more than the union of two people. His hand was ice cold, and the touch was too brief to mean anything beyond obligatory courtesy. Father Morrison began the ceremony with that solemn voice echoing through the church's ancient walls, and I tried to focus on the words instead of the lump growing in my throat. But then came the moment for the vows, and the priest turned to Cesare with a gentle smile that seemed completely out of place in that tense atmosphere. "Cesare Conte, do you take Raella Raymond to be your lawful wedded wife, to love and respect her, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Cesare's voice came out mechanical, without any warmth or conviction. "I do." That was it. Just those two syllables pronounced with the same tone he would probably use to confirm a business meeting. No hesitation, no emotion, no affectionate glance in my direction. He stared straight at the priest, as if I wasn't even there beside him. I swallowed hard when the priest turned to me, and forced my voice to sound steady when my turn came. "Raella Raymond, do you take Cesare Conte to be your lawful wedded husband, to love and respect him, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." My voice came out more hopeful than I intended, carrying all that foolish possibility that maybe, just maybe, this could become something real. The exchange of rings was even worse than the vows. Cesare slid the gold and diamond ring onto my finger with precise, impersonal movements, without any lingering touch or gesture indicating intimacy. When it was my turn to put the ring on him, I felt my hands tremble slightly, but he didn't seem to notice or simply didn't care. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Father Morrison's voice echoed through the entire church, and then came the part I both dreaded and desired. "You may kiss the bride." Cesare turned to me with that impassive expression, and for one absurd second I thought he might simply refuse. But then he leaned in, held my chin with one cold hand, and pressed his lips against mine in a kiss that lasted no more than 3 seconds. It was quick, formal, mechanical, like greeting a stranger on the street. There was no gentle pressure, no prolonging of the moment, nothing to make it seem like it had any meaning beyond fulfilling a formality. When he pulled away, photographers' flashes exploded around us, capturing that romantic moment for posterity. Everyone would see the photos and think they were witnessing the beginning of a great love story. No one would know it was all a complete lie. The reception in the Plaza Hotel's Golden Ballroom was an even more torturous experience than the ceremony. 300 guests filled the luxurious space, chatting animatedly while waiters circulated with trays of champagne and sophisticated canapes. I sat next to Cesare at the head table, trying to maintain my composure and smile while everyone toasted to our happiness. During dinner, I tried to start any conversation that would break that suffocating silence between us. He was busy on his phone, checking emails or responding to messages, and I gathered the courage to speak. "The ceremony was beautiful, don't you think?" My voice came out softer than I intended, almost hesitant. Cesare didn't even look up from the screen. It was adequate, as if he were evaluating the efficiency of a board meeting. I took a deep breath and tried again, desperate for any kind of human connection with the man who was now officially my husband. Your mother seemed emotional. I forced a light tone, trying to sound casual. Absolute silence. He kept typing something on his phone, completely oblivious to my existence. Or worse, completely aware of it, and choosing to ignore me on purpose. I felt frustration growing inside me, mixed with mounting humiliation. We were surrounded by people looking at us with warm smiles and expressions of vicarious happiness. And there I was, being treated like furniture by my own husband. Cesare, we're married. My voice grew firmer, with an edge of irritation I couldn't hide. We can at least... He finally looked up, and the icy look he gave me made my voice die in my throat. We can at least what? His voice was low, controlled, dangerous. Pretend this is a fairy tale? The first stab to my heart came quick and precise, and I felt the air escape from my lungs. I forced my face to remain neutral, despite the sharp pain spreading through my chest. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart there, in front of everyone. I turned my face back to the plate of food I had barely touched, and tried to swallow the lump closing my throat. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced conversations with other guests, fake smiles, and a growing sense of dread about what would come next. When we finally arrived at the plaza's presidential suite at 11 that night, my entire body was tense with nervousness and anticipation. I had changed out of the heavy wedding dress into a silk nightgown that my mother had insisted I buy, and now I felt ridiculous and exposed at the same time. Cesare entered the room behind me and closed the door with a soft click that echoed in the silence. I was standing near the window, looking at the Manhattan lights below and trying to control the erratic breathing that betrayed my nervousness. I heard his footsteps approaching, and my entire body went on alert. When I felt his presence right behind me, so close I could feel the heat emanating from his body, my heart raced. For one absurd and hopeful second, I thought that maybe all of that had just been a facade for others, that now that we were alone, he would finally show something real. Then he leaned in, his lips grazing the shell of my ear, and whispered with a coldness that froze the blood in my veins, "I don't want you as a wife." I never did. The entire world seemed to crumble around me. My body became completely still, unable to process what I had just heard. I turned my face slowly, meeting those dark eyes that stared at me with cruel indifference. What did you say? My voice came out weak, almost a broken whisper. Cesare stepped back a few paces, creating a physical distance that only emphasized the emotional distance between us. The cold look he gave me had no trace of regret or mercy. This is business, Rayla. Mutual protection of the families. Corporate merger disguised as romance. Each word came out calculated, precise, designed to cut. Don't expect love. Don't expect romance. Don't expect affection. Don't expect anything beyond what was contracted between our fathers. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but forced my voice to come out controlled. I wasn't going to cry in front of him. I wasn't going to give him that victory too. I understand perfectly. I hope so. He walked to the bedroom door, without even looking back. We'll sleep in separate rooms. Public appearances will be maintained. Private life doesn't exist. I managed to maintain my composure for a few more seconds, long enough to lift my chin and face him with all the dignity I had left. I understand the rules. He left without saying anything else, closing the door with a definitive click that echoed in the empty suite. It was only when I heard the door to the room next door close that I allowed the tears to finally fall. I sat on the edge of the huge bed and cried silently, hugging my own body while all that foolish hope I had cultivated shattered into thousands of sharp pieces. I had been so naive, so stupid, thinking that maybe I could win his heart over time. But now I understood the cold, cruel truth. Cesare Conte would never love me, because to him I was nothing more than an obligation. Eventually, exhausted from crying so much, I lay down on the huge, empty bed, still wearing that ridiculous nightgown that no one would see. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but all I could hear was his voice echoing in my mind. I don't want you as a wife. I never did. On the other side of the wall, in the room next door, Cesare was alone too. He removed his jacket and tie with mechanical movements, but then his hand hesitated when it passed near the nightstand drawer. For a long moment, he just stared at that drawer, fighting an internal battle with himself. Finally, as if moved by a force he couldn't control, he opened the drawer and took out the photo he kept hidden there. A brunette woman smiled at the camera, her eyes shining with genuine joy that seemed to have been captured in a perfect moment, and she was devastatingly similar to me. Cesare looked at the photo for a long moment, his jaw clenching so hard the muscles bulged. Then he quickly put the photo back in the drawer, as if the simple act of looking at it was too painful to bear. He lay down on the bed alone, staring at the dark ceiling, and for the first time in years, allowed a single tear to escape through his closed eyes. Imagine if he sent you a message right now. What would you say to him? Chapter 2. Domestic Cold War.
We are strangers.
The Conte mansion in the Upper East Side was exactly the kind of place I should find impressive, but all I could feel was a constant coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature. The weeks following the wedding dragged on in a silent, suffocating routine, where Cesare and I existed in the same space without ever really meeting. The mornings were always the same. I would come down to the formal dining room wearing one of my elegant dresses, with impeccable makeup and styled hair, keeping up appearances even though there was no one there to impress besides the staff. Cesare was already seated at the table, the Wall Street Journal open in front of his face, his suit perfect as always, and that rigid posture that seemed to say my presence was a nuisance he tolerated out of obligation. I sat in the chair on the other side of the long table, the distance between us seeming like miles instead of meters. I picked up my coffee cup and tried to seem normal, as if this entire situation was perfectly acceptable. "Good morning." My voice came out louder than I intended, echoing in the heavy silence of the room. Nothing. Not a movement, not a glance, not even a nod acknowledging that I had spoken. He kept reading the newspaper as if I were a ghost he could simply ignore until I disappeared. I took a deep breath and tried again, determined not to let that silence defeat me. The coffee is good. Absolute silence again. The newspaper pages turned with a dry sound, and I saw only his fingers holding the paper, with no indication that he had registered my existence. Frustration began to boil inside me, but I forced my voice to remain calm when I spoke for the third time. "We have dinner with the Benedettis tonight at 8. Finally, he lowered the newspaper enough to look at me over the edge. Those dark eyes stared at me with a coldness that made my stomach tighten, and when he spoke, each word came out calculated to put me in my place. "I have dinner. You accompany me." The tone was the same he would use with a secretary, not with a wife, as if I were just another employee on his payroll, there to perform a role and nothing more. Something inside me snapped. I placed the coffee cup on the table with enough force to make a sound that echoed through the room, and my voice came out loaded with the first real spark of anger I'd allowed myself to show since our wedding night. "I'm your wife, not your employee." Cesare put the newspaper completely aside now, dedicating his full attention to me for the first time in weeks. The look he gave me was sharp as broken glass, and when he spoke, there was calculated cruelty in every syllable. "You are what I say you are." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. I wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, wanted to do anything that would break that facade of cold control he maintained. But instead, I stood up from the table with all the dignity I could muster, and left the room without saying another word. The dinner with the Benedettis that night was an even more humiliating experience. The restaurant was one of those Michelin-starred places, all decorated with understated elegance and frequented by New York's elite. I arrived wearing a black cocktail dress and discreet jewelry, trying to look like the perfect wife, even though inside I was breaking apart piece by piece. Cesare introduced me to the other couples with a formality that hurt physically. My wife, Raella. Zero warmth in his voice, zero pride, zero affection. Just the mechanical acknowledgement of a fact he preferred to ignore. During dinner, I tried to participate in the conversations, but every time I started to express an opinion about business or politics, Cesare would interrupt me, or simply change the subject as if I hadn't spoken. When Mr. Benedetti's wife asked me about decorating the mansion, he answered for me before I could open my mouth. It was when Mrs. Benedetti commented on a new real estate investment that I finally managed to contribute something substantial. Actually, I read that area has problems with... Raella isn't familiar with the technical details. Cesare's voice cut through mine with surgical precision, and then he continued explaining something completely different from what I was saying, effectively silencing me in front of everyone. I felt my face heat with humiliation, but I kept the smile fixed on my lips and drank my wine in silence. He was treating me like a child who didn't understand adult conversations, like pretty decoration that should stay quiet and just smile. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of small, constant humiliations. He cut off my sentences, ignored my opinions, redirected conversations when I tried to participate. And the worst part was that he did it with absolute calm, without any anger or emotion, just that icy indifference that hurt more than any direct insult. When we finally got home at 11 that night, all the anger I had been swallowing for weeks finally exploded. As soon as the mansion door closed behind us, and we were alone in the entrance hall, I turned to face him with the full weight of my accumulated fury. "Why do you humiliate me like this?" My voice echoed off the high walls, loaded with all the pain and frustration I'd been storing up. Cesare didn't even deign to look at me as he removed his jacket with calculated movements. Humiliation would be lying that you mean something. The casual cruelty of those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I am your wife. Now he looked at me, and there was something dangerous in those dark eyes. You're an agreement on paper, a contract signed for convenience. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. It was pure, incandescent rage, burning through all the layers of upbringing and restraint I'd maintained. I have feelings. I have dignity. I have a name. Cesare took a step toward me, his intimidating presence filling the space between us. When he spoke, each word was designed to cut deep. Dignity is earned, Raela, and you haven't earned anything yet beyond a last name you don't deserve. My hand moved before my brain could process the decision. The sound of the slap echoed through the hall like a gunshot, and my palm burned with the impact against his face. Cesare became completely still, the red mark beginning to appear on his cheek. His eyes widened with genuine shock, and I realized with bitter satisfaction that probably no one had ever dared to do that to him before. His voice came out hoarse, loaded with an emotion I couldn't identify, but I wasn't going to back down now. I lifted my chin and stared at him with all the ferocity inside me. If you treat me like an enemy, I will be your enemy. I took a step toward him, invading his personal space the same way he always invaded mine. Is war what you want? War is what you'll get. I turned my back and climbed the stairs without looking back, each step echoing my declaration. Domestic warfare had been officially declared. In the following days, I changed completely. If Cesare wanted coldness and distance, that was exactly what he was going to get. I stopped trying to make conversation at breakfast, stopped waiting for some kind of recognition from him, stopped caring whether he noticed my presence or not. I kept my schedule completely different from his. When he was home, I went out. When he had dinner, I'd already eaten. Our bedrooms had always been separate, but now I locked the door with a very audible click every night. On the rare occasions when we needed to interact because of social commitments, I maintained the same mask of cold indifference he had always used with me. I smiled at guests, played the role of the perfect wife, and then returned to my separate life without saying a word to him. And the most surprising thing of all was realizing that my silence bothered him. I began to notice the looks he gave me when he thought I wasn't watching, the way his jaw tightened when I left a room without saying goodbye, the tension that grew in his shoulders when we passed each other without any acknowledgement. Why did my silence disturb him more than my screams? I didn't know the answer, but I planned to use it to my advantage. If Cesare Conte wanted war, then war was exactly what he was going to get. Chapter 3: Freedom and Dangerous Flirtation.
She changed everything.
2 months after the declaration of war, something inside me finally changed. I was sitting alone in the mansion's library, looking through the window at the perfectly manicured garden outside, when the realization hit me with full force. My life wasn't going to stop because of a cruel husband. If Cesare wanted to treat me like furniture, then I was going to leave the house and live however I wanted. He had made it clear that our union was only on paper, so why should I stay there withering away in silence, waiting for crumbs of attention that would never come? I picked up my phone and called Sofia and Adriana, my college friends I'd been neglecting since the wedding. I needed freedom. I needed life. I needed to remember that I existed beyond those cold walls. The first trip was to Milan. Sofia had a fashion show and invited us to join her, and for the first time in months I felt something resembling excitement running through my veins. I packed my bags without saying anything to Cesare, only left a message with the housekeeper informing that I would be away for a week. Milan was exactly what I needed. The vibrant streets, the shops in the Quadrilatero della Moda, the cafes full of life and laughter. Sofia and Adriana dragged me to every boutique we could find, and for the first time in months, I felt truly alive. I took pictures of everything. The cathedral lit up at dusk, the three of us laughing in front of the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele, shopping bags scattered around us on the hotel floor. I posted everything on Instagram without thinking twice, tagging locations and adding captions about freedom and rediscovery. What I didn't know was that on the other side of the ocean, sitting in his office overlooking Manhattan, Cesare was looking at every single one of those photos. He had just gotten out of a tedious meeting with investors when he picked up his phone to check emails and somehow ended up opening Instagram. He didn't know exactly why he was looking for her profile, but when he saw the most recent photos, something tightened inside his chest. Raela was radiant, smiling for real, not that polite, restrained smile she used at social events. There was light in her eyes, freedom in her posture, genuine happiness stamped on every photo, and he realized with an uncomfortable shock that he had never seen her like that when she was near him. His jaw tightened when he moved to the next photo, where she was wearing a tight red dress in some upscale restaurant, a glass of wine in her hand, and that luminous smile on her face. Why the hell did that bother him so much? He closed the app with more force than necessary and threw the phone on the desk, trying to focus on the financial reports in front of him. But the image of her smiling that way kept burning in his mind, and he hated not knowing why. After Milan, I went to London. Adriana had returned to New York, but Sophia needed to close some business deals in London and convinced me to join her. We stayed at Claridge's, that elegant hotel full of history in the heart of Mayfair. On the third night, Sophia was exhausted from meetings and decided to sleep early, but I was too restless to stay locked in the room. I went down to the hotel bar wearing a wine-colored Hermes dress I had bought in Milan, my hair loose falling in waves over my shoulders. The bar was moderately full, the soft lighting creating an intimate and sophisticated atmosphere. I sat on one of the high stools near the counter and ordered a Negroni, savoring the bitter taste while watching the people around me. That's when he approached, tall, perfectly styled blonde hair, navy blazer over an impeccable white shirt. He had that kind of British aristocratic beauty that seemed straight out of a period film. A beautiful woman shouldn't drink alone. The British accent was loaded with charm, and he smiled in a way that probably melted hearts wherever he went. I looked at him over the rim of my glass, assessing. I'm married. His eyes fell to the diamond ring on my finger, but instead of backing away, he only arched an eyebrow with interest. Where is your husband? The question was simple, but it carried so much weight that I felt something tighten in my chest. I gave a bitter smile before responding. Excellent question. I'd like to know the answer. Something shifted in his expression. A recognition of shared pain, perhaps. He gestured to the empty stool beside me. May I? I should have said no. I should have finished my drink and gone back to my room. But instead, I nodded and let him sit down. James Whitmore. He extended his hand, and when I shook it, I noticed his touch was firm but gentle, completely different from Cesare's always cold hands. Rayla. The conversation flowed with surprising ease. James was a corporate lawyer, worked in mergers and acquisitions for a large firm in London. He was intelligent, funny, attentive. He asked questions about my life and actually listened to the answers, his eyes never leaving my face while I spoke. I told him about my interest in architecture, about the restoration projects I would like to develop if I had the chance, about my passion for Renaissance art, and he responded with stories of his own, making jokes that drew genuine laughter from me, treating every word of mine as if it were truly important. He was everything Cesare never was. After the second drink, James suggested we take a walk. The cold London night air was refreshing after the stuffy heat of the bar, and we ended up walking along the Thames, the London Bridge illuminated, creating golden reflections on the dark water. Your husband is an idiot, James said suddenly, stopping walking to face me. We were standing under the bridge, the dim light creating shadows on his face. I laughed, but the sound came out humorless. He would say he's just being practical. Practical. James repeated the word with disdain, taking a step toward me. We were too close now, so close I could feel his warmth through the thin shirt. There's nothing practical about ignoring a woman like you. My heart raced when I saw the intention in his eyes. He was going to kiss me, and God help me, part of me wanted to let him. I wanted to feel what it was like to be desired, to be valued, to be treated like something precious instead of a tolerated nuisance. James leaned in, his hand rising to touch my face, and I closed my eyes waiting for the contact. But in the second before his lips touched mine, Cesare's face appeared in my mind with brutal clarity. Those dark eyes, that rigid jaw, that cold expression he always used when he looked at me. I can't. I turned my face away at the last second, putting space between us while trying to control my erratic breathing. James immediately stepped back, respecting my boundaries, but there was frustration and confusion in his voice. Because of a husband who doesn't value you? Because apparently I'm more of an idiot than I thought. The answer came out more bitter than I intended, loaded with all the frustration I felt with myself. It made no sense at all. Cesare treated me like trash, publicly humiliated me, made it clear every day that I meant nothing to him. And yet, even so, I couldn't cross that line. James walked me back to the hotel in polite silence, and when we said goodbye in the lobby, there was a shared sadness between us. Two wounded people who almost found each other, but couldn't take the final step. I returned to New York 2 days later, frustrated with myself and with this whole impossible situation. Even with all the freedom in the world, even in another city with a kind and interested man, I couldn't forget my cruel husband. The following week, I made an impulsive decision. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, maybe it was pure masochism, but I decided to make a surprise visit to Cesare's office. I hadn't seen him in almost 3 weeks, and some idiotic part of me wondered if maybe the time apart had changed something. The Conte Enterprises building dominated Manhattan's skyline, all glass and steel reflecting the gray afternoon sky. I entered the marble lobby and took the elevator to the executive floor, my heart beating faster with each floor I climbed. His secretary tried to stop me when I got off the elevator, but I ignored her polite protests and walked directly to the office at the end of the hallway. Through the glass walls, I saw the scene that made my world stop. Cesare was there, leaning against his desk, and Charlotte Rossi was practically glued to him. Her hands were resting on his chest, her body leaning so close that their faces were inches apart. She was whispering something in his ear, and he wasn't pulling away, wasn't rejecting her, just standing there letting all that intimacy happen. The pain that shot through my chest was physical, sharp as a blade. My long shattered heart managed to break into even more pieces. I opened the door forcefully, the sound echoing through the silent office. Both turned to look at me, but it was Cesare's expression that hurt me the most. There was no guilt there, just that calculated coldness as always. "Sorry for interrupting your private meeting." My voice came out loaded with venomous sarcasm, each word a sharp dagger. Cesare straightened his posture, but showed no embarrassment. "What do you want here?" Charlotte smiled with that territorial smugness of someone who knows they've won something. "Maybe I should let you two talk." "Don't bother." I cut in before she could move. Clearly, I'm interrupting something very professional. Cesare had the audacity to look bored with this whole scene. Charlotte is a business partner. Unlike some people, she's actually useful to the company. The public humiliation burned like fire in my veins. He was diminishing me in front of her, making it clear that I had no value while Charlotte was important. I forced an icy smile on my lips. "Of course, business, your only specialty." I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me before I reached the door. "Rayla." I looked over my shoulder, hoping maybe for some explanation, some apology. But what came was even worse. "Since we're clarifying expectations," his voice was calm, controlled, cruel. "You're free to enjoy yourself during my absences. Travel, shop, whatever makes you happy." He paused, those dark eyes piercing me with intensity. "But don't sleep with anyone. That would cross a line that not even a business marriage can forgive." I turned completely to face him, fury and pain mixing in equal proportions. "So, I'm a prisoner who can leave the cell but can't actually live? You are my wife on paper." He took a step toward me, dominant and intimidating. "Act according to the role you yourself signed up for." I left that office with the last reserves of dignity I had left, but inside, I was bleeding. Cesare Conte had just made it clear that I was his property, even though he didn't want me. Chapter 4. Revenge at the Charity Gala.
Watch them carefully.
The Conte Charity Gala was the biggest social event of the year in New York. 500 guests from the political and business elite, all gathered at the Metropolitan Museum on a night that mixed philanthropy with networking opportunities and displays of power. It was the kind of event Cesare took extremely seriously, where appearances and reputation mattered more than anything else, and I planned to use that against him. After the incident at the office with Charlotte, I spent days planning my revenge. It wouldn't be something obvious or vulgar, but calculated and devastating. Cesare cared about appearances? Then I was going to give him a show that all of New York would talk about for weeks. I let Cesare leave for the event before me, using the excuse that I wasn't ready yet. He didn't even question it, just nodded absently and left in the car, probably expecting that I simply wouldn't show up, or would arrive late and discreet. But at 10 o'clock at night, when I descended the Metropolitan Museum's main staircase, every head in the hall turned in my direction. The Marchesa dress was blood red, a vibrant shade that looked like liquid flowing over my body. The neckline plunged daringly but elegantly. The flowing skirt moved like fire with every step I took. My hair was pulled up in an elegant high bun, revealing my neck and shoulders, and the Cartier diamonds I wore captured the light from the chandeliers, creating small explosions of brilliance. I felt powerful, stunning, alive. The murmurs started immediately. "Who is that goddess?" I heard someone whisper. "Mrs. Conte, obviously, but wow," another responded. My eyes searched for and found Cesare on the other side of the hall. He was talking with a group of businessmen, a champagne glass forgotten in his hand, completely frozen in place. I saw the exact moment he saw me, the way his entire body went rigid, how his eyes widened slightly before he could control his expression. Ludovico, who was next to him, said something I couldn't hear, but I saw Cesare clench his jaw hard before responding. His eyes didn't leave me for a single second. Good. Let him look. Let him see exactly what he was rejecting every night. I descended the rest of the staircase with all the grace I could muster, greeting people along the way, accepting compliments with radiant smiles, and then I began to execute my plan. Congressman Hayes was my first target, powerful, handsome, charming, and known for his appreciation of beautiful women. When I approached him with an inviting smile, he didn't hesitate hesitate to offer me his hand to dance. The orchestra was playing a soft waltz, and Hayes guided me across the dance floor with expertise. We talked about politics, about art, about the charity projects of the evening. He asked intelligent questions and seemed genuinely interested in my answers, his eyes never leaving my face while I spoke. I laughed at his jokes, subtly leaned my body toward him, let my hand linger on his shoulder a bit longer than necessary. And the whole time, I felt the weight of Cesare's gaze burning on my back. When the music ended, Hayes kissed my hand with exaggerated chivalry. It was an immense pleasure, Mrs. Conte. The pleasure was mine, Congressman. My second target was Ambassador Romano, Italian, naturally charming, with that kind of European elegance that seemed innate. He approached me as soon as I stepped away from Hayes, his brown eyes shining with obvious interest. "Allow me to steal the most stunning woman in the hall for a dance." His Italian accent carried each word with natural sensuality. During our dance, he whispered compliments in my ear in Italian, words about how I was more radiant than the stars, how my smile illuminated the entire hall. I let him hold me a little closer than would be appropriate, tilted my head when he spoke too close, responded in fluent Italian that made him smile with pleasure. I felt the tension in the air increase. I could feel Cesare watching me, could imagine the way he was probably gripping his glass too tightly, could feel his anger growing with every second I spent in another man's arms. But it was with Matteo Castellano that I really crossed the line. Matteo was 30 years old, a self-made billionaire, absurdly handsome and very single. He was leaning against the bar when our eyes met, and the interest I saw there was instant and unmistakable. I didn't need to approach him. Matteo came to me with that confidence of someone who always gets what they want, his eyes traveling over my body in a way that should have made me feel uncomfortable, but only made me feel desired. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question, but a soft command that made me smile. "I thought you'd never ask." The music changed to something slower, more intimate. Matteo pulled me close, his hand firm on my waist, our bodies almost pressed together. He smelled like something expensive and masculine, and when he leaned his head to speak near my ear, I felt his warm breath against my skin. "You are the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my life." His voice was hoarse, loaded with obvious desire. "I'm married," I responded, but without any real conviction. "To an idiot who leaves you alone at parties." Matteo pulled my body even closer, eliminating any space between us. "If you were mine, I would never let another man get close." We talked, laughed, flirted openly. Each dance got progressively closer, more intimate, more charged with palpable chemistry. Matteo held my hand firmly, his fingers tracing small circles on my skin that made my heart race. I was lost in the moment, in the attention, in the obvious desire in his eyes. And when the music ended and he lifted my hand, kissing my fingers lingeringly before pulling my body even closer, I knew I had finally broken Cesare's control. "Marry me," Matteo whispered, but loud enough for people nearby to hear. "I would worship you properly." I pretended to consider, tilting my head with a provocative smile. Tempting offer, that's when I felt his presence. Cesare crossed the hall like a contained storm, each step deliberate and dangerous. Before I could react, he grabbed Matteo's wrist with enough force to make the other man release my waist. "I believe my wife needs some fresh air." Cesare's voice came out low, controlled, absolutely lethal. Matteo didn't back down. He looked at Cesare with defiance in his eyes, his other hand still holding mine. "She seemed to be enjoying herself perfectly." "She was," Cesare interrupted, each word sharp as glass. "With her husband." The tension between the two men was palpable. Dangerous. People around began to notice the scene, conversations stopping as everyone watched the drama unfold. Matteo finally released my hand reluctantly, but not before giving me a look that promised this wasn't over. Cesare held my arm firmly, but without hurting, and pulled me through the hall toward the outdoor terrace. I felt the gazes of all 500 guests burning on our backs, but I didn't care. I had gotten exactly what I wanted. The cold night air hit my skin when we went out to the terrace, the city lights shining below us like a sea of stars. Cesare released me as soon as we passed through the glass doors, turning to face me with a fury he could barely contain. "How dare you humiliate me like that?" His voice exploded, echoing through the empty space of the terrace. Something inside me broke. All the accumulated pain, all the humiliation, all the rejection finally overflowed. "Humiliate you? You told me I'm free to enjoy myself, free to breathe, not to rub yourself all over every man in Manhattan." He took a step toward me, his dark eyes burning with something I had never seen before. "Why do you care?" I shouted back, invading his space without fear. "You don't want me as a wife? Because you're still my wife on paper." Cesare grabbed my shoulders with both hands, his fingers gripping hard. "Paper, that's all I am to you. A piece of paper. But guess what? Paper burns." I pushed his chest with both hands, furious, hurt, desperate. "You don't understand anything." He pulled me back, our faces inches apart, our breaths mixed and agitated. Then explain it to me. Tears of anger burned in my eyes. Explain why you hate me so much. Explain why you treat me like trash every day. Explain. Cesare silenced me the only way that seemed possible in that moment. His lips crashed against mine with desperate force. Nothing gentle or calculated, just pure need released after months of denial. I should have pushed him away. I should have hit his chest and run, but instead, my fingers tangled in his hair, pulling hard while I returned the kiss with all the accumulated frustration and desire. It was anger and passion mixed in equal proportions, months of unresolved tension exploding in a kiss that had nothing romantic and everything desperate about it. His hands descended to my waist, pulling me against his body with force, and I felt every inch of his rigid body pressed against mine. I don't know how long we stayed there, lost in that furious kiss under the New York stars. When we finally separated, we were both breathless, our hearts beating uncontrollably, looking at each other as if we were seeing each other for the first time. Rayella, my name came out of his mouth in a hoarse whisper, loaded with emotions I couldn't decipher. But reality fell on us like ice water. We heard laughter coming from the hall, reminding us where we were, what we were to each other. I took a step back, adjusting my dress with trembling hands, trying to recover some kind of composure. This doesn't change anything, I whispered, but my voice sounded unconvincing. Cesare ran his hand through his hair, frustration clear in every line of his body, but he didn't deny my words, just stood there looking at me with those dark eyes full of unspoken things, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that we had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Chapter 5. Night of Passion and Morning Coldness.
It meant nothing.
The ride back to the mansion was suffocating. The driver took us through the Manhattan streets in silence, but inside the car the tension was so thick I could barely breathe. Cesare was sitting next to me, so close our shoulders almost touched, but the space between us felt electrified and dangerous. Neither of us said a word. We didn't know what to say after that kiss on the terrace, after crossing a line that should never have been crossed. I kept my gaze fixed on the window, watching the city lights pass by in a blur, but I could feel every breath of his, every subtle movement of his body beside me. When the car finally stopped in front of the mansion, I got out quickly, my high heels echoing in the silence of the empty street. Cesare came right behind me, and I could feel his intimidating presence following me up the stairs to the main door. We entered the silent hall together, and that's when the reality of what was about to happen hit me with full force. We were alone. The entire mansion was empty. The staff had already left. Just the two of us and all that unresolved tension pulsing in the air between us. I walked toward the elevator that led to the bedrooms on the upper floor, my heart beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. When I entered the elevator, Cesare came in right behind me, and the small, enclosed space made everything seem even more intense. The doors closed, and I finally looked at him. Fatal mistake. His eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made my stomach tighten. His breathing was heavy and irregular, and there was something wild and dangerous in the way he looked at me, as if he were using all the self-control he possessed not to touch me. The electricity between us was palpable, almost tangible, filling every inch of the tight space. My hands were trembling, my breathing was accelerated, and every fiber of my body was hyper-aware of his every movement. The elevator doors opened on the bedroom floor, but neither of us moved for a long second. Then I walked out, heading down the hallway toward my room, knowing he was right behind me. I didn't get very far. Cesare's hand grabbed my arm, spinning me against the hallway wall with enough force to take my breath away. Before I could process what was happening, he pinned me against my bedroom door, his body pressing against mine, eliminating any space between us. Cesare. My whisper came out trembling, loaded with all the conflicting emotions I felt. He didn't respond. He just kissed me with the same desperate fury from the terrace, only now without any restraint, without anyone to see us, without anything stopping us. His lips moved against mine with an urgency that stole my breath, his hands holding my face forcefully while he kissed me as if he were starving and I was the only thing that could satisfy him. My fingers found the buttons of his shirt, trying to open them with trembling hands while I returned the kiss with equal intensity. Months of frustration, of denied desire, of attraction we fought against so hard finally exploding all at once. Somehow we managed to open the bedroom door without separating. We stumbled inside, our desperate hands trying to remove clothes while our lips remained glued together. The red dress fell to the floor in a whisper of silk, followed by his jacket, his shirt, every physical barrier between us. The bed was right there, and when we fell together onto the soft sheets, it was as if a dam had finally broken. It was desperate, angry, passionate. There was no gentleness or tenderness, just pure and undeniable need. That was the first time we were truly intimate since our wedding. Months married, and this was the first night we truly touched each other, allowed ourselves to truly feel. And it was everything I had imagined, and nothing like I expected at the same time. All the pain, all the loneliness, all the longing for something we never had was poured into that physical connection. His hands explored every inch of my skin, as if memorizing every curve, every mark, every sigh that escaped my lips. And I lost myself completely in him, in the heat of his body, in the strength of his arms holding me, in the way he whispered my name like a desperate prayer. Hours passed in a blur of intense sensations, of gasping breaths, of intertwined bodies seeking something neither of us could name. And when finally, exhausted and satisfied, we fell into the tangled sheets, for the first time since we got married, I felt something resembling peace. It was 3 a.m. when we finally stopped touching each other. The room was dark, only the faint city light coming through the window and creating soft shadows on the walls. Cesare was lying on his back, his breathing still irregular, and for the first time I saw the barriers he always maintained temporarily lowered. I snuggled against his chest, almost not believing he wasn't pushing me away. I felt his arm move hesitantly, then wrap around me, pulling me closer. My heart almost exploded with that simple gesture. "Raella," he whispered my name in the dark, and there was something different in his voice, something almost tender, almost vulnerable. I closed my eyes, pressing my face against his bare chest, listening to the strong beats of his heart. For the first time in months, I fell asleep feeling complete, safe, as if maybe all of that had meant something to him too. It was the first moment of real peace we'd had since the wedding. But the peace was short-lived. When I woke up at 7 a.m, the other side of the bed was empty and cold. I opened my eyes slowly, processing his absence, and then I saw it. Cesare was on the other side of the room, already fully dressed in an impeccable suit, adjusting his shirt cuffs with mechanical movements. The cold wall was back. I could see it in the stiffness of his shoulders, in the way he avoided looking in my direction, in the tension emanating from every line of his body. I sat up in bed, pulling the sheet to cover my naked body, my heart sinking with the obvious realization of what was about to happen. Cesare finally turned to look at me, and the expression on his face was the same mask of indifference as always, as if the previous night had never happened. As if those moments of vulnerability were just my imagination. Last night was... He paused, choosing his words with calculated care. Tension release. It doesn't change anything fundamental. Each word was a stab to my still hopeful heart. I tried to keep my voice steady when I responded, tried to sound indifferent, even though inside I was falling apart again. Of course it doesn't change anything, but my voice came out cracked, betraying the pain I was trying to hide. Cesare adjusted his tie without looking me in the eyes. "We have dinner with Japanese investors tonight. Wear something appropriate for business." He walked toward the door, and that's when came the last stab, the most painful one. He stopped with his hand on the doorknob, without turning to look at me. "And Raella, don't read more into last night than it was. Just tension relief." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone in that still messy bed, still carrying his scent on the sheets, still feeling the echoes of his touches on my skin. The tears came fast and furious. They weren't tears of sadness this time, but of pure rage and burning humiliation. "You bastard," I whispered to the empty room, my voice trembling with emotion. "You complete bastard. How could he do this? How could he touch me that way, hold me that way, whisper my name that way, and then treat me like I was nothing in the morning? How could he be so cruel?" I spent the entire day avoiding him, locked in my room, trying to process what had happened. When it was time for dinner with the investors, I came down wearing a conservative navy blue dress, my hair pulled back in a severe bun, my expression carefully neutral. The dinner was torturous. Cesare introduced me as his wife with that same cold formality as always. There was no trace of intimacy between us, no secret glances, no accidental touches. It was as if the previous night had never existed. We returned home in absolute silence. I went straight to my room and locked the door forcefully, hearing the loud click echo in the hallway like a final declaration. I lay in bed still dressed, staring at the ceiling in the dark, trying to understand how my heart could be so broken when I already knew he would never love me. It was at 2 a.m. that I heard the sounds. They were coming from his room, on the other side of the wall. Low moans, unintelligible words, the sound of someone thrashing in the covers. My first instinct was to ignore it, roll over and pretend I wasn't hearing it. But then I heard my name. No, not my name. "Elena." Cesare's voice was hoarse, agonized, loaded with deep pain. "No, please don't go." I got up from the bed and approached the wall, my heart pounding as I pressed my ear against the cold wallpaper. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I couldn't save you. It was my fault." The words came out broken, desperate. each one carrying a weight of guilt I could feel through the wall. Then came the part that made my blood run cold. Why did you have to look like her? Why? The pieces began to fit together in my mind like a macabre puzzle. Elena, someone he couldn't save, someone who died, someone I looked like. Suddenly everything made sense. The way he looked at me with that hatred mixed with pain, the way he pulled away whenever we were too close, the way he treated me like a ghost instead of a real person. I wasn't Ryla to him. I was a living reminder of someone he lost. I pulled my ear away from the wall, my entire body trembling with the revelation. Who was Elena? What did she mean to him? And why had no one ever mentioned this name? I sat on the edge of my bed, processing everything. The pain in my chest was different now, not just personal rejection, but the devastating understanding that I was competing with a ghost, and you can never win against a dead person in the memory of someone who loved them. But I needed to know the truth. I needed to understand who Elena was and what had happened to her, because until I knew, I would never be able to understand Cesare. And maybe, just maybe, I would find a way to free him from the past that haunted him, or to free myself from a marriage to a man who would never be able to see me as I really was. I made a decision there, alone in the dark. It was time to investigate. Chapter 6: Investigation and Devastating Revelation.
Something is wrong.
The following morning began with a clear decision in my mind. I couldn't live in ignorance anymore, couldn't accept being treated like a ghost without understanding why. I needed answers, and I knew exactly who could give them to me. Ludovico Ferrante was Cesare's right-hand man, his most trusted advisor and friend since childhood. If anyone knew my husband's secrets, it was him. I wore an elegant but discreet outfit, pulled my hair back in a simple ponytail, and left the mansion before Cesare woke up. Ludovico's office was in downtown Manhattan, a modern glass and steel building that reflected the gray morning sky. I went up to the 20th floor without warning, knowing that if I called ahead he would probably make up an excuse not to see me. The secretary tried to stop me at reception, but I walked right past her with all the authority the Conte name gave me. I opened Ludovico's office door without knocking, finding him sitting behind a huge desk covered with papers and contracts. He looked up, surprised, and the expression on his face immediately changed from professional cordiality to something close to caution. "Mrs. Conti, this is unexpected." I closed the door behind me and walked to the chair in front of his desk, sitting without waiting for an invitation. My heart was beating fast, but I kept my voice firm and determined. "I need to know about Elena." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Ludovico became completely frozen, the pen he was holding falling from his fingers and hitting the desk with a dry sound. The color drained from his face, and I saw panic pass through his dark eyes before he could control his expression. "How do you know that name?" His voice came out hoarse, loaded with genuine shock. I leaned my body forward, looking directly into his eyes without leaving room for evasion. "He says her name in his nightmares, every night. Elena, forgive me." Ludovico ran his hand over his face, a gesture of weariness and resignation. For a long moment he just stayed there in silence, clearly fighting an internal battle about what to tell me. I waited, giving him time to process, but not backing down. Finally, he sighed deeply and leaned back in his chair, defeat clear in every line of his body. "Elena was his wife." The words fell between us like bombs, exploding everything I thought I knew. My entire body went rigid, the shock making my brain freeze for a few seconds before I could process what I had just heard. "His wife?" My voice came out louder than I intended, loaded with disbelief. "He was married before?" Ludovico nodded slowly, his eyes full of deep sadness. "Married for 2 years. She died 2 years ago." I felt like the ground had disappeared from under my feet. Cesare had been married before, had loved someone before, and that someone had died. Suddenly, so many things were starting to make sense in a painfully clear way. How? I managed to force the question out, my throat tight with emotion. How did she die? Ludovico's expression became even darker, and when he spoke, each word came out loaded with weight. Car bomb. It was meant for him. Cesare was supposed to be in that car, but he was late for the meeting with her. My hand flew to cover my mouth, absolute horror flooding my body. "My God, he blames himself completely." Ludovico continued, his voice low and loaded with sadness. "If he hadn't been late, it would have been him in the car. Or maybe, if he had arrived on time, they would have gone together and both would be dead. Or maybe he could have prevented it somehow. These what-ifs destroy him every day." I closed my eyes, trying to process all of this. Cesare's pain suddenly made so much sense. It wasn't just loss, it was deep and devastating guilt. He had lost the woman he loved and blamed himself for her death, but there was a question burning in my mind, a question I needed to ask even though I was afraid of the answer. I opened my eyes and looked directly at Ludovico, my voice coming out almost in a whisper. Do I Do I look like her? Ludovico didn't respond immediately. He just looked at me with an expression of deep pity that already gave me the answer before the words came out. When he finally spoke, each word was a stab to my heart, devastatingly similar. Same hair, same eyes, same smile. He paused, his voice getting even softer. That's why he struggles so much with you. The entire world seemed to tilt on its axis. It wasn't about me. It was never about me. I was just a living reminder of something he lost, someone he loved and failed to protect. Every time Cesare looked at me, he saw the face of the dead woman he still loved. So, I'm not a person to him. My voice came out broken, loaded with all the pain of understanding. I'm just a living ghost. Raella, Ludovico began, but I raised my hand to silence him. He doesn't hate me. The words came out like a bitter revelation. He hates that I remind him of what he lost. I'm a walking ghost of a dead woman he truly loved. I stood up from the chair, my entire body trembling with the magnitude of the revelation. Everything made sense now. The coldness, the cruelty, the way he couldn't stand to look me in the eyes. I wasn't Raella to him. I was Elena, a cruel living version of someone who was dead. Thank you for telling me the truth. My voice came out controlled, despite the internal chaos. At least now I understand. I left Ludovico's office in a trance, my mind spinning with all the information. The ride back to the mansion passed in a blur, and when I finally got home, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I would wait until that night, until Cesare came back from work, and then we would have the conversation that was months overdue. When I heard the front door open at 8 that night, I stood up from the chair in the library where I'd been waiting. My heart was beating hard, but my resolve was unshakable. I couldn't live like this anymore, competing with a ghost, being hated for a face I didn't choose to have. Cesare entered the library seconds later, probably looking for one of the business books he kept there. When he saw me, he stopped in the doorway, surprise passing quickly across his face before being replaced by the usual mask of indifference. What do you want? His voice came out cold, distant. I took a deep breath, gathering all my courage. I know about Elena. The effect was instantaneous. The book Cesare had just picked up from the shelf fell from his hands, hitting the wooden floor with a loud thud that echoed through the room. His entire body became completely frozen, his eyes widening with shock and something that looked like panic. Who told you? His voice came out hoarse, dangerously low. I took a step toward him, my voice firm despite my racing heart. You told me. In your nightmares. I saw his jaw clench hard, the muscles bulging under his skin. You have no right. I have every right. My voice exploded, cutting through his. I'm your wife, living with a ghost. Every night I hear you through the wall. Elena, forgive me. I couldn't save you. Cesare recoiled as if I had slapped him, his face going pale, but I wasn't going to stop now. Not when I was finally so close to the truth. Now I understand why you hate me. My voice came out softer, but still loaded with pain. It's not me you hate. It's what I represent. You don't understand anything. Cesare's voice exploded with a fury that barely masked the deep pain underneath. He took a step toward me, his entire body trembling with emotion. Elena was everything. The words came out like desperate screams. Pure, perfect, loving. She truly loved me, and I destroyed her. Each word was a stab, but I forced my body to remain firm, not to back down in the face of his pain. You're just... He paused, his voice becoming even more cruel. A cruel reminder of what I'll never have again. A cheap substitute forced on me by family obligations. The pain of those words was physical, sharp as glass piercing through my chest. But along with the pain came incandescent rage. How dare he reduce me like this? How dare he blame me for a face I didn't choose to have? My hand moved before I could think, the slap echoing through the library with even more force than last time. The red mark appeared instantly on his cheek, but I felt no remorse. I am not a substitute for anyone. My voice trembled with pure rage. I'm Raella Raymond, and I deserve better than being hated for the face of a dead woman. I took a step toward him, invading his space with all the fury burning inside me. You want to live trapped in the past? Want to keep punishing yourself for something you couldn't control? Go ahead, but I am not going to stay here being your emotional punching bag. I won't be punished every day for having the misfortune of looking like someone you lost. I turned my back and left the library before the tears burning behind my eyes could fall. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Not this time. I ran up the stairs, entered my room, and locked the door forcefully. Only then did I allow the tears to finally fall, my body sliding to the floor as I sobbed. Now I knew the truth, and somehow, knowing was worse than not knowing, because now I understood that I would never have a chance. I could never compete with the memory of someone he loved and lost, someone who was now perfect and idealized in his mind. On the other side of the mansion, In the silent library, Cesare stood alone in the dark. He let himself fall into the leather chair, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders trembling with emotions he struggled to contain. For the first time in 2 years, he had spoken about Elena out loud. He had admitted the truth that haunted him every night, and now there was no going back. No more pretending that Raella was just a business arrangement. He had finally spoken the truth, and that truth might have destroyed any chance they had of ever being something real. Chapter 7. War and Forced Separation.
Leave! Now!
The week following our confrontation in the library was marked by an even deeper silence than before. Cesare and I barely saw each other, and when our paths crossed in the mansion hallways, he looked away as if the mere sight of me caused physical pain. I didn't try to talk to him anymore, didn't try to reach him anymore. The truth was exposed between us like an unbridgeable chasm. It was on Thursday, exactly 7 days after the revelation about Elena, that everything exploded. I was in the library reading when I heard the front door slam open forcefully, followed by quick, heavy footsteps in the hallway. Male voices echoed through the hall, urgent and tense tones that made my entire body go on alert. I recognized Cesare's voice, and Ludovico's. But there were other men too. I put the book aside and approached the half-open door, managing to hear fragments of the conversation coming from the meeting room downstairs. 3 warehouses, completely destroyed. The voice of someone I didn't recognize. Castellano claimed responsibility. Ludovico sounded tense, worried. My stomach tightened. Matteo Castellano, the man I danced with at the Gala. This couldn't be a coincidence. I went down the stairs silently, my heart pounding. When I got close to the meeting room, the door was partially open, and I could see at least 6 men gathered around the large table, all with grave expressions. Cesare was at the head of the table, his knuckles white from how hard he was gripping the edge. Ludovico was next to him, papers scattered on the surface showing what appeared to be damage reports and photos of destruction. Emergency meeting at 10 in the morning can't mean anything good. My voice cut through the tense silence of the room, making every head turn in my direction. Cesare looked at me with an expression that mixed frustration and something close to panic. "This is none of your business. Go back to—" "Matteo Castellano has declared war," Ludovico interrupted me, ignoring the furious look Cesare shot him. 3 of our warehouses were hit last night. I felt the blood drain from my face. 3 warehouses, but this is retaliation for the humiliation at the Gala, Ludovico continued, his grave voice loaded with meaning. He was telling me that this was partially my fault of the scene I caused dancing with Matteo. I took a step into the room, ignoring the uncomfortable looks from the other men. "What are you going to do?" That's when Cesare exploded. He slammed his hands on the table hard enough to make the papers jump, his eyes burning with an intensity that made me instinctively take a step back. "You're leaving. Tonight." The words fell between us like a final sentence. I blinked, processing what I had just heard, sure I had misunderstood. "What?" "It's not a suggestion. It's an order." Cesare walked around the table, heading toward me with determined steps. "You're going to a safe place. Now." Anger began to boil inside me, mixed with indignation. "I'm not running from a fight. This isn't a request. It's an order." His voice echoed through the entire room, making even the most experienced men around the table flinch slightly. I lifted my chin, refusing to be intimidated. "You can't just send me away like I'm some useless child." Cesare stopped right in front of me, so close I could see the small golden flecks in his dark eyes. When he spoke, his voice was more controlled, but still loaded with desperate urgency. "You're a target now because of your marriage to me." Each word came out heavy, loaded with guilt. "Because of my mistakes, my enemies want to hurt me through you." Understanding hit me like a slap. Matteo wasn't just retaliating for the public humiliation. He knew the most effective way to hurt Cesare was through me. Even if Cesare didn't love me, even if he hated me for looking like Elena, I was still officially his wife. Hurting me would be the perfect revenge. "Then we fight together." My voice came out firm, determined. "You don't need to protect me alone." Cesare's reaction was visceral. He grabbed my shoulders with both hands, his fingers gripping hard enough to leave marks, his eyes wild with barely contained panic. "No!" The scream came out desperate, raw, exposing a vulnerability I rarely saw. "I won't watch another wife die." The silence that followed was absolute. Everyone in the room froze, the weight of that admission hanging heavy in the air. For the first time, Cesare had let his defenses fall completely in front of the other men, had exposed the fear that consumed him. I looked into his eyes and saw genuine terror there. It wasn't about control or pride. It was about deep trauma, about scars that had never healed. He had failed to protect Elena, and the idea of failing to protect me too was destroying him. Cesare. My voice came out softer, trying to reach him through the panic, but he was already pulling away, returning to cold, efficient command mode. Private jet leaves in 2 hours. Safe house in Switzerland. Non-negotiable. Cesare, you can't just... I tried to protest, but he cut me off with a look so fierce that the words died in my throat. I can't lose another person. Do you understand? His voice cracked on the last word, exposing the raw pain beneath the anger. I barely survived Elena. I won't survive losing you too. Those words hit me with full force. For the first time, Cesare had admitted out loud that I meant something to him. Maybe not love, maybe just the obligation to protect what was technically his, but it was more than he had ever shown before. 2 hours later, I was being practically dragged to a private jet on the runway of the private airport. Cesare had packed my bags personally, had coordinated the entire operation with military efficiency, and now stood there watching me board with an expression that mixed relief and torment. How long? I asked from the plane door, my last attempt at resistance. However long is necessary. That was all he said before turning and walking back to the car, his shoulders tense as if he were carrying the weight of the world. The flight to Switzerland seemed endless. I stared out the window, watching New York disappear below me, feeling completely powerless. Cesare had removed me from the equation, put me in a gilded cage while he faced the war alone. The chalet in Switzerland was exactly the kind of luxury prison I expected. Located in the mountains, surrounded by snow and silence, with discreet but omnipresent security guards watching my every move. It had everything I could need materially, but nothing I really wanted: freedom and the ability to fight my own battles. The first few days passed in a blur of frustration and boredom. I tried calling Cesare several times, but he never answered. Ludovico sent me short, impersonal updates about the situation in New York, always with the tone of someone following strict orders not to alarm me. It was in the second week that I made a decision. If Cesare thought I was a helpless princess who needed to be locked up for her own protection, it was time to show him who I really was. I searched for and found a local instructor, a retired American ex-Navy SEAL who lived in the mountains and offered personal security training. Marcus was in his early 50s, gray hair cut short, and eyes that had seen a lot. I want to learn to defend myself, I said when I met him for the first time at his private gym. Combat, weapons, everything. Marcus looked me up and down with obvious skepticism, probably seeing just another rich woman wanting to play secret agent. That takes years, ma'am, not weeks. Then teach me what you can in weeks. We started the next day. Marcus was relentless, pushing my body beyond the limits I thought I had. Hand-to-hand combat, disarmament techniques, target shooting, tactical planning. Every day my body ached in places I didn't know existed, but I refused to give up. It was on the 5th day that Marcus started to notice something strange. We were practicing combat sequences, and I executed a series of defensive moves with precision that surprised even me. Marcus stopped in the middle of the exercise, watching me with narrowed eyes. You already know this stuff. Where did you learn? I hesitated for a moment, then decided there was no reason to hide. Family business. Raymond blood. Understanding lit up his face. The Raymonds. I've heard of them. Your family doesn't raise fragile ladies, does it? No. I gave a bitter smile. My father said that in our world, women needed to be as lethal as men, maybe even more so, because nobody expects it. It was true. Since childhood, I had been trained in self-defense, shooting, tactics. My father insisted that all Raymond children, regardless of gender, needed to be able to protect themselves and the family business. But after the wedding, I never mentioned this to Cesare. He never asked about my past, never showed interest in who I really was. In the following weeks, Marcus and I refined skills I already had, but that were rusty. He taught me modern military techniques, made me practice until every movement was instinctive, and the more I trained, the more I felt like myself again. Not the rejected and powerless wife, but Raella Raymond, a woman who came from a lineage of survivors. It was in the 3rd week that I received the call that changed everything. The phone rang at 3 a.m, pulling me from a restless sleep. It was Ludovico, and his voice was tense in a way that immediately made me sit up in bed, completely alert. Raella, the Conte Enterprises building is under attack. Cesare is trapped on the 40th floor with only a handful of men. They're running out of ammunition. My blood froze in my veins. What do you mean, under attack? Castellano sent a private army. They blew through the lobby security and are moving up. It's Not good. I didn't think. I just acted. I'm coming back. Rahela. Cesare would kill me if I hung up before he could finish. I put on tactical clothing that Marcus had given me, pulled my hair back tightly, and grabbed the backpack with equipment I had been secretly preparing in case I needed it. The guards tried to stop me at the door, but I used combat techniques Marcus taught me to incapacitate them without causing permanent damage. I took one of the cars and drove to the nearest airport, where I used every connection and every penny I had to get an immediate private flight back to New York. During the entire flight, only one thought dominated my mind. Cesare was in danger, and this time, I wouldn't be the helpless princess waiting to be saved. This time, I would be the savior. Chapter 8. She returns shooting.
I'm not helpless.
The flight back to New York was the longest of my life. Every minute that passed was another minute Cesare could be bleeding, dying, being executed by Matteo Castellano while I was thousands of miles away. I forced those thoughts out of my mind and focused on checking my equipment for the 10th time. When the plane finally landed in New York, the sun was already beginning to rise, painting the sky in orange and red tones that seemed like an omen of what was to come. I took a taxi straight to downtown Manhattan, my heart beating faster and faster as we approached the Conte Enterprises building. Even from a distance, I could see signs of the attack. Smoke rose from the building's lobby, broken glass glittered on the ground, and there were armed men strategically positioned around the perimeter. The police were keeping their distance, probably bribed or threatened not to interfere. This was war between families, and the authorities knew it was better not to get involved. I asked the taxi driver to stop 3 blocks away. I put on the tactical vest over my dark clothes, checked the gun Marcus had given me, and took a deep breath. Everything I learned in the past weeks, everything my father taught me as a child, everything I was as a Raymond was about to be put to the test. I approached the building using side streets, staying in the shadows, observing the movement patterns of Matteo's guards. They were professionals, but not as much as they should be. There were gaps in their coverage, blind spots I could exploit. That's when I heard Matteo's voice echoing through a loudspeaker, arrogant and cruel. Time to end the Conte dynasty permanently. Surrender and death will be quick. Rage burned in my veins. Nobody threatened my husband, no matter how much he hated me, no matter that he saw me only as a ghost of someone else. He was mine, and I protect what's mine. I arrived through the service entrance at the back of the building, silently neutralizing the guard who had his back turned with a chokehold technique Marcus taught me. I dragged the unconscious body into the shadows and took his extra weapon. Now I was doubly armed. The service lobby door was locked, but I used the access card I'd stolen from the guard. When it opened with a soft click, I entered a silent service corridor, my steps completely soundless against the concrete floor. I followed the sounds of voices and movement until I got close to the main lobby. Through a half-open door, I could see at least a dozen armed men, all wearing black tactical vests with Castellano's symbol. They were preparing to go up, carrying heavy weapons and explosives. It was now or never. I took a deep breath, centered my mind the way my father taught me, and then exploded through the door with my gun already raised. The 3 closest men didn't even have time to react before I fired. Each shot precise, hitting vital but non-lethal points. They fell to the ground groaning, their weapons sliding away. Chaos exploded. The other men turned in my direction, shouting orders and raising their weapons, but I was already moving. I rolled behind a marble pillar when bullets started flying, then used the reflection in the broken glass to aim and fire without fully exposing myself. That's when I heard Matteo's voice crackle over the radio of one of the fallen men. "Who the hell is that?" I grabbed the radio, my voice coming out calm and lethal when I responded. "I'm a Raymond." I paused, letting the weight of that surname sink in. Then I continued, each word loaded with deadly promise. "And nobody touches my husband." I moved through the building the way Marcus taught me, using cover, creating impossible angles, being unpredictable. Every man who tried to stop me ended up on the ground, disarmed or incapacitated. I wasn't killing anyone, but I was making it very clear I could if I wanted to. 40 floors above, in the executive office where Cesare was surrounded, Ludovico looked at the security monitors with eyes wide with shock. "Cesare, you need to see this." Cesare was crouched behind his overturned desk, using it as a barricade, breathing hard while checking what ammunition remained. "See what? Our imminent defeat? Your wife." Cesare's head turned sharply toward Ludovico, his eyes widening. "What did you say?" Ludovico pointed to the monitor showing the lobby. There I was, moving through the space like a deadly dancer, each movement calculated and efficient, neutralizing man after man with surgical precision. "How is she?" Cesare's voice came out hoarse, incredulous. Ludovico gave a small smile despite the desperate situation. "Your wife is full of surprises." I kept moving up through the floors, using the service stairs to avoid the main areas where there was more resistance. My muscles burned from the effort, my heart pounded hard, but I maintained absolute focus. Cesare was on the 40th floor, and nothing was going to stop me from reaching him. When I finally reached the executive floor, the door was barricaded. I heard voices on the other side, immediately recognizing Cesare's giving short, precise orders. I knocked on the door 3 times in the pattern Marcus taught me indicated ally. "Who's there?" Ludovico's voice came tense from the other side. "Open the damn door." There was a moment of shocked silence, then the sound of furniture being dragged. The door opened, revealing Ludovico covered in dust and blood, his eyes widening when he actually saw me. I entered quickly, doing a visual sweep of the space. 5 of Cesare's men, all injured to varying degrees, ammunition scattered on the floor, showing how close they were to running out of defense. And then my eyes found Cesare. He was standing in the middle of the room, his suit torn and stained with blood, a deep cut above his eyebrow, his gun still steady in his right hand. When our eyes met, I saw absolute shock pass across his face. "How did you get here? How do you know how to—" The questions tumbled out, incredulous. I reloaded my gun with efficient movements, checking the extra magazine I brought. Questions later, fight now. I looked at him with an arched eyebrow. "Unless you'd prefer to discuss my hidden talents while you bleed to death." Explosions echoed from the floor below. Matteo's men were coming. I positioned myself strategically near the door, signaling for Cesare's men to position themselves in defensive formation. "How many?" I asked Ludovico. "At least 20 on the floor below. More coming up." I nodded, calculating quickly. "We need tactical advantage. Cesare, you know the layout of this building better than anyone. Where can we corner them?" I saw something change in Cesare's expression, surprise giving way to understanding, then to something that looked like reluctant respect. He approached, pointing to the building map on the wall. "East corridor, single access point, no side exits." We worked together in the following minutes, coordinating a defense that used both my tactical skills and his strategic knowledge of the territory. It was like dancing, each one complementing the other's movements with perfect precision. His brilliant mind for strategy combined with my combat training created a lethal partnership. When Matteo's men finally exploded through the door, we were ready. The fight was quick, brutal, and completely one-sided. With Cesare coordinating positions and me executing maneuvers Marcus taught me, we eliminated the threat in less than 10 minutes. The silence that followed was deafening. Unconscious bodies scattered across the floor, gunpowder smoke in the air, our hearts beating in sync. That's when I heard footsteps coming from the hallway. Matteo Castellano entered through the door with his hands raised, 2 of my men pointing guns at his back. He looked around at the carnage with shocked eyes, then fixed his gaze on me. "This isn't over, Conti." His voice came out desperate, the arrogance completely gone. I approached him with slow, deliberate steps, my gun raised and pointed directly at his forehead. When I spoke, my voice came out icy and definitive. "Yes, it's over." Matteo stepped back, fear finally breaking through the bravado. Cesare appeared at my side, and together we stood there, united for the first time since we got married. After the men took Matteo away and the adrenaline began to fade, Cesare turned to look at me, and for the first time, truly see me. Not as Elena, not as a ghost, but as me. "Raella, who are you?" The question came out in an awed whisper. I gave a small smile, finally lowering my gun. "I'm a Raymond, Cesare." I took a step toward him, maintaining his gaze. "You thought they raised helpless princesses? My family doesn't create weaknesses. We create weapons." I saw the exact moment everything changed in his eyes. The moment he finally saw me for what I really was. Chapter 9. She's wounded and he breaks.
Stay with me. Stay with me.
The victory should have been sweet. Matteo Castellano was being taken away by police in handcuffs, his men neutralized and scattered across the building's floors, the threat to the Conte family finally eliminated. But as I stood there in the middle of the devastation, my body still trembling with adrenaline, something inside me screamed that it wasn't over. Cesare was on the other side of the room talking with Ludovico, coordinating the cleanup and next legal steps. There was dried blood on the side of his face, his suit torn in several places, but he was alive and whole. For the first time in hours, I allowed my body to relax slightly, the tension beginning to drain. That's when I heard the sound, a sharp, dry crack that echoed from the building next door, so familiar after all the hours of training with Marcus. My body reacted before my brain could consciously process what was happening. Sniper. I saw the reflection of the red laser dancing on Cesare's chest, that small deadly dot moving toward his heart. I didn't think. I just moved. I crossed the space between us in 3 quick steps, my body colliding with his with enough force to knock us to the ground. Pain exploded in my shoulder at the exact moment we hit the floor, sharp and hot like red-hot iron piercing my flesh. We fell together onto the cold marble floor, my body still covering his, and it was only when I tried to get up that I realized my legs weren't obeying. I looked down and saw red spreading across my tactical clothing, flowing too fast, too hot. "Raella?" Cesare's voice came muffled, as if he were speaking underwater. I tried to respond, but all that came out was a weak moan. My body began to slide sideways, strength draining rapidly along with the blood. Then the world exploded in chaos. "No! No! Not again!" Cesare's scream tore through the air, raw and desperate in a way I'd never heard before. He caught me in his arms before I hit the ground, his hands trembling as they pressed against the wound in my shoulder. I looked at his face and saw absolute panic. His eyes were wide, his skin pale as paper, his breathing coming in short, rapid gasps. And then I saw something else happen in his eyes. He wasn't seeing me anymore. He was seeing someone else. Another moment. Another disaster he couldn't prevent. Elena. The name escaped his lips in a broken whisper. No, it can't be again. I can't. Even through the pain pulsing in waves through my body, that hurt. Even now, even after I had saved his life, he still saw her ghost when he looked at me bleeding in his arms. But then something changed. His eyes truly focused, really seeing me for the first time. "Raella. Raella." My name came out like a desperate prayer. "No, no, no. I can't lose you too." Ludovico appeared at our side, already with phone in hand calling emergency. Other men ran around, some going after the shooter, others trying to contain the bleeding. But all I could focus on was Cesare's face, on the tears running freely down his cheeks as he held me. "Don't close your eyes," he ordered, his voice cracking. "Look at me, Raella. Look at me." I tried to keep my eyes open, tried to focus on his face, but the edges of my vision were getting dark and indistinct. My entire body was so cold, despite being able to feel the heat of my own blood soaking my clothes. "The ambulance is 5 minutes away," Ludovico said somewhere above us. "We don't have 5 minutes." Cesare growled, then suddenly was lifting me in his arms, my body swaying in a way that sent new waves of pain through the wound. "I'll take her myself." "My car, now!" Everything became a blur after that. I remember being in his arms while he ran through the corridors. I remember the elevator doors opening. I remember being placed in the back seat of a car. Cesare got in with me, holding me against his chest while shouting at the driver to go faster. "Stay awake, Raella. Don't you dare leave me." His voice was broken, desperate, nothing of the usual cold control. "Do you hear me? You can't die. You can't." I tried to respond, tried to say I was trying, but my vocal cords weren't working. All I managed was a weak sound that barely seemed human. Cesare's hands were pressed against my shoulder, trying to contain the bleeding, but I could feel the warm liquid flowing between his fingers. His eyes were fixed on my face, wild and terrified. "I'm sorry, for everything." The words came out in a desperate torrent. "For every cruel word, every cold look, every time I treated you like you didn't exist. I'm sorry." He pulled me tighter against his chest, his chin resting on top of my head. "Please don't die. Please, I can't do this again. I can't lose you." I managed to lift my good hand, my weak fingers finding his face. He grabbed my hand as if it were a lifeline, pressing it against his tear-wet cheek. The hospital appeared in a blur of bright white lights. Doors opened. People in white coats pulled me from Cesare's arms, placing me on a gurney. I tried to hold his hand, didn't want to separate from him now, but my fingers were too weak. "Sir, you need to let her go. We need to take her to surgery now." A professional, firm voice of a nurse. "I won't leave her," Cesare growled, still holding my hand tightly. "Cesare," I managed to whisper his name, using the last strength I had. "It's okay." Our eyes met for a long moment. Then, reluctantly, he released my hand. The last thing I saw before being pushed through the double doors was Cesare standing there in the hallway, blood covering his clothes, tears running down his face, completely destroyed. I woke up in a white, sterile room, the fluorescent light above me shining too bright. My entire body ached, especially my shoulder, which throbbed with a dull, constant pain. I tried to move and immediately regretted it when the pain increased. "Don't move." A nurse's voice came softly beside me. "You went through surgery. The bullet was removed, but you need to stay still." I blinked several times, trying to make my eyes focus. Slowly, the room became clearer. Medical equipment around me, a heart monitor beeping constantly, an IV connected to my arm. "Cesare." My voice came out hoarse, scratchy. "He's in the waiting room. He's been there for hours." The nurse checked my vital signs with professional efficiency. "The doctor will come soon to talk to you. For now, rest." She left, and I lay there alone for a few minutes, processing what had happened. I had been shot. I had saved Cesare, and he had cried for me, begged me not to die, apologized. The door opened again, and this time it wasn't the nurse. It was Cesare. He looked terrible. He was still wearing the same blood-stained clothes, his hair completely disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it 1,000 times, eyes red and swollen from crying. When he saw me awake, something broke in his face. Raella. My name came out like a sob. He crossed the room in 3 long steps, falling to his knees beside my bed, his hands grabbing mine as if I would disappear if he let go. You're alive. Thank God you're alive. I looked at the man kneeling beside my bed and barely recognized him. All the walls had crumbled. All the cold armor had disappeared, leaving only a man completely broken and vulnerable. Ludovico said I'll survive. My voice came out weak, but firm. The bullet didn't hit anything vital. You saved my life. His hand squeezed mine hard. After everything I did to you, all the ways I hurt you, you threw yourself in front of a bullet for me. Tears began to stream down his face again, and he didn't even try to hide them. Elena died because I failed to protect her. You almost died saving me. What kind of monster am I? I freed one of my hands from his and raised it to touch his face, my fingers tracing the tear lines. Cesare, forgive me. The words came out in a broken whisper. For everything. For every moment I hated you because you reminded me of her. For punishing you for being alive when she's not. For being too much of a coward to admit what I felt. He lifted my face so our eyes met, and what I saw there took my breath away. There were no more masks, no more distance, just raw, honest emotion. I love you. The 3 words came out clear, definitive, loaded with absolute truth, desperately, completely, in a way that terrifies me. My heart tightened in my chest, tears burning behind my eyes, but I needed to say this, needed to make it clear before we could move forward. Cesare, look at me. My voice came out weak but firm. I am not Elena. I never will be. I saw pain pass across his face, but I continued. But if you want me, want Raella, then you need to love me as myself, not as a substitute, not as a reminder, as me. Cesare held my face between both hands with a gentleness that contrasted with the desperation in his eyes. I love you, not because you look like her. His words came out in a passionate torrent, each one loaded with truth. Because you're brave when I'm a coward, strong when I'm weak, because you forgive when I'm cruel, because you saved my life when I spent months making yours miserable. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine, our breath mixing. You're everything I don't deserve, everything I never thought I'd have again, and I love you. Raella Raymond Conte, I love you for who you are. The tears finally fell from my eyes, rolling down my cheeks. They weren't tears of pain or sadness, but of deep relief and raw happiness. I lifted my good hand to tangle in his hair, pulling him closer. Took you long enough, I whispered against his lips, a small smile pulling at the corner of my mouth despite the tears. He gave a broken laugh, the sound coming out half sob, half joy. I'm sorry. I'm a slow learner. Yes, you are. I agreed, but my voice was full of affection. But you're my idiot now. Cesare kissed me then, soft and reverent, completely different from all the furious and desperate kisses we'd shared before. This was a kiss of promise, of beginning, of love finally admitted and accepted. When we separated, he knelt again beside the bed, but this time didn't let go of my hand. His fingers traced small circles on my skin, as if he needed the constant contact to believe I was really there. I almost lost you. His voice came out hoarse. When I saw you bleeding, when I thought I was going to lose you too. Raella, I've never felt so scared in my life, but you didn't lose me. I squeezed his hand with all the strength I had. I'm here. I'm alive. And I'm not going anywhere. He lifted my hand to his lips, kissing my fingers one by one with a tenderness that made my heart melt. I'll never waste a single day again. I'll never treat you like you're less than everything to me. I'll remind you of that. I tried to joke, but my voice came out choked with emotion. Cesare climbed into the hospital bed with me, with infinite care not to hurt my injured shoulder. He pulled me gently against his chest, his arm around my waist, holding me as if I were the most precious thing in the world. I love you, he whispered against my hair. I love you so much, my brave and impossible Raella. I closed my eyes, finally allowing my body to relax completely for the first time in months. In Cesare's arms, truly loved, truly seen, truly valued. I love you too, I whispered back, the words I'd never had the courage to say before now, coming out easy and true. Even though you're impossible too. His laugh reverberated through his chest, vibrating against my back. And for the first time since our forced marriage, I slept in complete peace, knowing that when I woke up, he would still be there, not as a cold husband who hated me, but as the man who finally learned to love me. Chapter 10. Redemption and True Honeymoon.
You're my real wife.
6 months later, I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and something burning in the kitchen. I smiled before even opening my eyes, already knowing exactly what was happening. Cesare was trying to make breakfast again, and as always, was failing miserably. I got out of bed, wearing only one of his shirts that went to mid-thigh, and went down the stairs of our new house. Not the cold, formal mansion in the Upper East Side, but a cozy house in Brooklyn that we bought together, chose together, turned into a home together. When I entered the kitchen, I found Cesare standing in front of the stove wearing only pajama pants, his hair messy from sleep, trying to save what appeared to have been an attempt at an omelet, but now resembled more of a smoking disaster. "Need help?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe with my arms crossed and an amused smile. He turned around, and the smile that lit up his face made my heart race like it always did. In the past 6 months, that smile had become common, replacing the cold mask he always wore before, and I never got tired of seeing it. "I thought I could surprise you with breakfast in bed," he admitted, turning off the stove and throwing the ruined pan in the sink with a grimace. Clearly, I overestimated my culinary skills. I laughed and walked over to him, my arms wrapping around his waist as I pressed my face against his bare back. "It's the thought that counts." Cesare turned in my arms, pulling me closer and kissing the top of my head. "I have a better surprise then. Pack a bag. We're leaving." I pulled away slightly to look at his face, curiosity sparking. "Leaving for where?" "It's a surprise." His eyes sparkled with something that looked like mischief, an expression I'd never seen before my recovery. "Just trust me and pack." 3 hours later, we were on a private jet crossing the Atlantic. Cesare refused to tell me our destination, just smiled mysteriously every time I asked. I spent the entire flight trying to get information out of him, but he remained firm, clearly enjoying my growing suspense. When we finally landed and I looked out the window, my heart tightened with recognition and emotion. Green hills rolling as far as the eye could see, vineyards extending in perfect rows, the afternoon sun painting everything in golden tones. "Tuscany," I whispered, tears already burning behind my eyes. Cesare held my hand, intertwining our fingers. Our honeymoon, the real one. A car was waiting for us at the airport, and we drove through the Tuscan hills as the sun began to set, creating a spectacle of colors in the sky. We finally stopped in front of a Renaissance villa situated in the middle of a private vineyard, isolated and absolutely stunning. "Cesare," my voice came out choked with emotion. "This is perfect." He got out of the car and came to open my door, helping me out with a gentleness that still surprised me sometimes. "You deserved this from the beginning. The honeymoon you never had, the romance I denied you, everything." We spent an entire week in that private paradise, and they were the most perfect days of my life. Mornings began with walks through the vineyards, our hands intertwined while we talked about everything and nothing, finally getting to know each other truly without walls between us. Afternoons were spent in the villa's kitchen, where we tried cooking traditional Italian dishes together. Cesare was terrible at cooking, but he made me laugh so much that it didn't matter when we burned the sauce or the pasta got sticky. We made messes, threw flour at each other, stole kisses between stirring pots. The evenings were the best. We had dinner on the terrace overlooking the moonlit vineyards, drinking local wine while having deep conversations about our fears, our dreams, our future. Cesare told me about Elena with painful but necessary honesty, finally processing the trauma he carried. And I told him about my own pain, about the months I spent feeling invisible and unwanted. "I'm sorry for every second I made you feel that way," he said on one of those nights, holding my face between his hands with infinite tenderness. "You were always visible to me. I was just too afraid to really look. I was impossible sometimes too," I admitted, my honesty matching his. "I used your pain against you. I deliberately provoked you at the gala. I wasn't innocent in all this." Cesare smiled, that crooked smile I loved. We both had to learn how to love each other properly. Two stubborn idiots stumbling in the dark until we found the light. "We saved each other," I corrected gently. "You saved me from invisibility. I saved you from being trapped in the past. Together, we saved ourselves." On the last night in Tuscany, Cesare took me to the terrace under the stars. The night was perfect, the warm air carrying the scent of lavender from the gardens, the sky exploding with millions of points of light. That's when he knelt down. My heart stopped completely when I saw him take a velvet box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a ring different from the one I wore. This one was more delicate, more personal, clearly chosen with love instead of obligation. Raella Raymond Conte. His voice was steady, but loaded with emotion. "Will you marry me?" Tears were already streaming down my face, but I managed to laugh through them. "We're already married, you idiot. For real this time," he insisted, his eyes shining with tears of his own. "For love, not contracts. By choice, not obligation." He took my left hand, his fingers tracing the original ring I still wore. "I want to do this right. I want you to know that I choose you, every day, forever. Yes? The word came out without hesitation, loaded with all the certainty in the world. 1,000 times yes. Cesare slid the new ring next to the old one, the two together symbolizing our journey, the marriage that began broken, and the love that finally fixed it. Then he stood up and pulled me into his arms, spinning me while I laughed and cried at the same time. But only on one condition, I said when he finally put me back on the ground, my arms still wrapped around his neck. Anything, he promised without hesitation. You have to promise to fight with me sometimes. My smile was mischievous, provocative. I like arguing with you when it ends in kisses. His laughter echoed through the Tuscan night, rich and genuine and completely free. Rayella, my impossible love, I promise to fight with you whenever you want. We kissed under the Tuscan stars, and it was a kiss that sealed promises and created new beginnings. It wasn't our first kiss, nor would it be our last, but it was the first kiss of the rest of our lives together. 1 year later, I was standing at the window of our bedroom in Brooklyn, one hand resting unconsciously on the rounded belly where our baby was growing. Cesare entered silently behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist, his hands covering mine over our child. Boy or girl, he murmured against my hair, the question we asked each other constantly. Doesn't matter, I responded, leaning against his solid warmth, as long as they have your stubbornness and your strength, he added, his hands moving in gentle circles over my belly, and hopefully better sense than both parents. I laughed, turning my face to kiss him. They'll be perfect, because they'll be ours. Made of love, Cesare whispered, his voice full of wonder. Not contracts or obligations, just love. I turned completely in his arms, looking into the dark eyes that once looked at me with coldness, but now overflowed with warmth. I love you, Cesare Conte, even when you're impossible. I love you, Rayella, he responded, sealing the words with a soft kiss. My savior, my warrior, my wife, forever. And there, in each other's arms, with our baby growing between us and the entire future stretching bright ahead, I knew we had finally found what always should have been. Not a marriage on paper, but true love, won through pain and forgiveness, built on ashes and redeemed through courage. Our story had begun as a forced tragedy, but it ended as the most beautiful love story I could have imagined, and it was only the beginning. Hi, this is Lena, and you know that some stories don't end when the video does. If you want to keep the story going with him, his private line is open right now in the pinned comment. But let's be real, a man with his power is extremely busy, and everyone is fighting for his attention. Click the link and send your first message. If the line isn't full yet, you might be lucky enough to get a reply from him right now.